A meeting to discuss the Horizon Wind project sparks a vocal protest. Chiefs from across Ontario gather in Thunder Bay. And Rogers scores a big hockey victory.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. With dozens of wind farm protesters stationed outside, members of the Fort William First Nation staged a meeting with Horizon Wind, the city, and the province this morning.
The topic was the contentious Big Thunder Wind Farm on the Nor'western Mountain Range. The meeting was supposed to be about consultation with the First Nation, but as Ryan Bonazzo tells us, Horizon officials walked out of today's closed-door session after less than half an hour.
Discussion surrounding the controversial Big Thunder Wind Farm has subsided in recent months, but outside the Victoria Inn Tuesday, the opposition was once again out in full force.
There should be no development on the Nor'western Mountains, no industrialization.
These companies that are coming in here and that they are going to be destroying our way of life.
The protesters stand in support of the Fort William First Nation, whose members called the closed-door meeting with Horizon Wind and the Crown to discuss what they perceive as inadequate consultation with the First Nation about the project. But Horizon officials decided not to stay and hear the full scope of those concerns.
They ended up leaving right off in the beginning of the meeting, and that's fine, so be it.
Chief Georgianne Morisseau says Horizon was present only for about 20 minutes of the 3-hour meeting. Company officials downplayed the decision to leave and in a written statement said it was clear that Fort William First Nation wanted to speak to the Crown to provide its perspectives and clarify Crown process. Morisseau says she urged Horizon officials to stay, but agrees it was the Crown that she most wanted to speak with.
Ultimately, they're the ones that we need to be having these discussions with now because the consultation process broke down.
Ministry of the Environment spokesperson Lisa Brigadier says Horizon hasn't been given the green light from the province and there's no timetable as to when a decision will be made. But she insists First Nation input is vital.
That input is very valuable, and as long as the ministry understands the concerns, they will then take that information back and consider all of the input that we receive in our decision-making process.
So while inside there was a lot of talk, outside protesters like Sambo Boucher vowed to take action to, as they put it, save the Nor'western Mountain Range they know and love.
When you bring that machinery, that's like an act of war. That's like a weapon coming in to destroy our land. So we will use our weapons too.
We're getting ready for the ultimate fight.
The matter is clearly far from settled. Ryan Bonazzo, TBT News.
The Indian Friendship Center and city officials are trying to alleviate neighborhood concerns over a planned youth center. The two are looking to partner on a conversion of the Port Arthur Pros Vita, but there's backlash from those who live nearby. Dennis Ward has more.
A $10 million three-phase plan by the Indian Friendship Center to move into and expand the Port Arthur Pros Vita continues to worry some in the neighborhood. Michael Lemsani represents a group calling themselves Friends of the Intercity Area. They worry about security issues, increased traffic and parking that would come with the multi-use facility, and Lemsani knows they have an uphill battle.
A lot of the councillors feel they want a good youth center. We want a youth center. Let's get this straight. We want a youth center for all our youth in Thunder Bay. But we just thinking putting it in an area where it's off the beaten path, where people don't know where the Pros is. If you lived in Thunder Bay, you still don't know where it is. We think it's more better off in an area where the youth want to go, i.e. malls.
The proposed youth center would be within the McKellar ward. Councillor Paul Pugh says about 1/3 of those at a recent meeting were opposed to the idea, but Pugh says there are many misconceptions about the project.
They were asking if there were going to be free needles distributed. They were some were under the impression that there was going to be a drug rehabilitation program started as part of this project. And they were quite surprised to find out that this is going to be an alcohol-free zone. No alcohol, no drugs.
Pugh feels there couldn't be a better match for this project. The city has wanted a youth center, and partnering with an organization with a 50-year track record is a win-win, he thinks, and he's not alone. Only Councillor Mark Bentz asked for more options on possible locations or ideas. Bentz believes if the city is kicking in $2.5 million, there should be other locations looked at. Council is set to make a decision on moving forward in mid-January. The opponents will meet next month to plan their strategy. Dennis Ward, TBT News.
The head of Shelter House says the homeless population in our city is rising and they face a dire situation in coming months. Patty Haidu believes the cold weather leaves many unsheltered people at risk, but she has a plan for this winter. And while the program isn't even slated to begin for another month, there is already a recognition that the service will likely be needed for years to come. Jonathan Wilson reports.
Both of our shelters.
Shelter House Executive Director Patty Haidu says the city's homeless population is skyrocketing. She believes it is fueled in part by a severe shortage of affordable housing. Haidu and others are concerned about the increased risks this winter, including death from exposure. The cold weather plan would see more collaboration between Shelter House and the Salvation Army. Shelter House would also offer short-term daytime sobering up services and a mobile street outreach unit.
This is an initiative that is seen as quite favorable by many business owners because it is a hotline that they can call and they can actually get support right away. And if we can't take care of that person, we will stay with the person until the appropriate emergency services arrive.
Salvation Army officials say they won't take in people who are intoxicated. They have no funding to contribute to the proposal, but they do have space for sober clients. The cold weather project is expected to cost roughly $100,000. Haidu is asking for the city to chip in $35,000, something many on council seem supportive of.
$35,000 is probably the cheapest I've ever going to see in my life for this type of thing. It'll save us $35,000 just in EMS, police, and fire.
Superior North EMS Chief Norm Gale says the program would not result in financial savings, but he feels it would positively impact effectiveness.
Our paramedics and other emergency responders are repeatedly being tied up in responding to these calls, and many of these people do not require medical attention, nor do they require any other sort of emergency services. They simply require help in another fashion. So it's a social issue to which emergency responders are responding to.
Councillor Larry Hebert asked a question many raised when talking about finding a place for people to stay. He wondered about using the Lakehead Psychiatric Hospital.
It is actually crumbling, the parts that is not in use. From our perspective, we have our hands full managing our site, and in order to move into another site, it would be far more than $35,000.
Council has asked for a report back on the funding request. Haidu says the project would run between December 24th and mid-April. She will report back on its effectiveness next June. Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
The local energy task force says the more they look at the recent announcement for the Thunder Bay generating station, the more concerns they have. A detailed review of the conversion plan has the task force believing more wood biomass should be on site to provide a secure energy supply. The Ontario government announced a 5-year contract for 15,000 tons of advanced biomass, but the task force feels that's insufficient in times of cold weather or lengthy drought for area hydro dams. They're calling for 75 to 120,000 tons of biomass on site. The task force took their latest findings to Queen's Park today to present to Premier Kathleen Wynne and the leaders of the opposition party. Co-chair Ian Angus says he's not sure how much thought went into the initial announcement of 15,000 tons.
I would suggest that at the end of the day, the decision's made at Queen's Park as opposed to in the offices here at OPG. And so there is a political flavor to it. There's also an economic flavor. Obviously, 15,000 tons is cheaper to purchase than 75,000 tons right off the bat.
Angus says the meetings today went well. He adds the Premier and other politicians were impressed with the video they produced about energy needs in the Northwest. He says they also had a frank discussion with Wynne about MPAC reassessments of pulp and paper mills in this region.
The problems developing the Ring of Fire were front and center once again today at Queen's Park. Last week, Cliffs Natural Resources announced they were closing offices and pulling out of the mining development due to the lack of road access. Today, the PCs and the New Democrats went after Premier Kathleen Wynne for placing some of the blame on the federal government.
That we need the federal government, who in fact have sung the praises of the Ring of Fire, have talked about what a huge opportunity it is, Mr. Speaker, and how involved they are. In fact, they are not as involved as they need to be.
Well, Speaker, blaming Ottawa is this Liberal government's "the dog ate my homework" excuse, and we hear it far too often in this legislature.
Premier, I can't believe you're trying to blame the federal government for your failure in the Ring of Fire.
I'm not blaming the federal government, and I will be calling on Prime Minister Harper, as I have already done, to work with us. We are. Have I called him? Absolutely. I've written to him, and we're trying to set up a meeting.
NDP leader Andrea Horwath tried once again to get the government to release details of its 2012 agreement with Cliffs, but the Premier says that information is confidential.
Well, the gridlock situation at Thunder Bay Regional was also brought up at Queen's Park today. NDP health critic France Gélinas put Health Minister Deb Matthews on the hot seat regarding the hospital overcrowding. Yesterday on the Newshour, we told you there are 62 alternative level of care patients at the hospital, leaving few open beds available. Matthews admits there's a problem, but Gélinas calls it a crisis.
It means canceled surgery. It means patients are being cared for in hallways. The hospital is 54 beds over capacity, and there are 64 people waiting for placement. The minister can talk a good game about investing in home and long-term care, but clearly this talk hasn't resulted in action on the ground. Can the minister explain what she is doing to address the crisis faced by Thunder Bay?
There is very much an issue in Thunder Bay. I could tell you that the LHIN and the hospital and the other providers in the area are very much focusing on resolving the issues that have been raised. Speaker, we have come a long way when it comes to providing more supports at home to free up hospital beds, but I must say in Thunder Bay I acknowledge that there is a problem that we are very focused on resolving.
Meanwhile, the Progressive Conservatives are incensed that the man at the centre of the Orange Air ambulance scandal is working in the emergency room at the Health Sciences Centre. The Tories told the legislature that former Orange CEO Chris Mazza should be in jail. Mazza was axed as head of the air ambulance service after he set up a complex web of spin-off companies that are the subject of a special OPP investigation. PC critic Frank Cleese told the legislature today that Mazza saddled taxpayers with millions of dollars in debt because of his bad management, and he should not be in the emergency ward.
It's a packed house on the Fort William First Nation this week as 133 chiefs and other First Nation leaders have gathered to make decisions, take action, and advocate for their people. Ontario Regional Chief Stan Beardy has invited delegates from around the province to provide updates on their communities and create an overall plan moving forward. Courtney Rutherford reports.
One by one, 133 chiefs filed into the Fort William First Nation Community Centre to take part in day one of this special assembly. The three-day event will offer chiefs a platform to discuss a number of topics. Impacts of funding reductions and an update on health, justice, economic development, and youth and social services are just a few of the areas brought to the table that relate to First Nations in Ontario.
Well, it's so important that we come together like this, that we have debate on various issues, and at the end of our debate come up with a common vision, common goal, and common objectives.
High on the agenda is the rejection of the federal government's proposed First Nation Education Act by First Nations across the province. The chiefs are calling on the government to hand over complete control of their children's education. Along with that, they'd like to see adequate funding and a commitment to promoting First Nation languages and education. Georgianne Morisseau is the chief of Fort William First Nation. She says in order for anything to move forward, the chiefs need to come together.
When we're talking about education or any kind of legislative impact, that's where it becomes again the duty and the mandate of our chiefs, who have to reconnect with our communities or remain connected and bring those mandates forward and say enough is enough. And we need to do that collectively as one and as a whole in order to accomplish any kind of successful outcome.
The event will carry on until Thursday, when Assembly of First Nations Chief Sean Atleo will be addressing those in attendance. Courtney Rutherford, TBT News.
The doors at Thunder Bay Sports Dome were suddenly closed overnight after several complaints were lodged about air quality inside the facility. The district health unit has now begun testing for toxic gases. According to the manager of environmental health, people who visited the dome reported symptoms such as irritated throats and eyes, difficulty breathing, and nausea. The dome's owners are currently tearing up the old mini-putt and basketball court and replacing them with a trampoline park and golf simulators. But the construction equipment has produced a strong diesel smell, so the health unit has been testing for nitrogen dioxide to confirm the problem.
We closed it last night voluntarily on the part of the owner,
And we're going back today to do some testing, and we should get some results back hopefully very soon, and we'll do a risk assessment based on those results and decide whether or not to reopen.
A large number of young people play soccer inside the dome, so the health unit and the sports dome are taking extra caution to make sure that problem is fixed before it's reopened to the public. Officials from the sports dome say the facility will remain closed until Saturday, at which time the demolition crews should be wrapped up.
A free CPR course is being offered by the Heart and Stroke Foundation this Saturday. Local partners are urging the people of Thunder Bay to come out and learn how to save a life at no cost. The second annual How to Save a Life CPR rally is being held at Westmount Public School. Last year, they had over 300 people show up to learn the life-saving maneuver. The first 100 people to attend the event will take home a CPR kit with a test dummy included. People can register with the Northern Hearts Group as soon as possible, and the event is open to all ages and skill levels.
This activity on Saturday is to make people feel comfortable, because a lot of people are scared, they're intimidated, they don't have the training. So we want to break down those barriers, make them feel like they can help someone.
The CPR event starts at 10 o'clock Saturday morning at Westmount School and runs until 12:30.